Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful day today. After 9 days of rain and wind and cold, we finally get a nice day out here. It's very nice. My name is Mark Willis. I'm the Chief Information Officer here at VCU. On one hand, you have viruses, worms, fishers, Nigerian princes, hackers, cyber thieves. And on the other hand, you've got firewalls, VPNs, complex passwords you have to change seems like every other day, tokens. What a pain all this is. But what's the bigger pain? And if you're an information security professional, it's obviously the former. But if you're a typical user, it's the latter, all those preventative things you need to do for information security. Well, welcome to the 2011 Cybersecurity Fair. This is an annual event, and it's a two-day affair designed to help promote a culture of technology security here at VCU. We have a number of speakers today and tomorrow to talk to you about the latest threats, the latest issues in information security, and the latest technologies and the latest things to come along to help you counter those information technology threats. Today's session will be here at the Student Commons. We have a number of rooms that will be used, a number of presentations, and tomorrow's session will be held on the MCV campus at Tompkins-McCaw Library. If you can't get enough of the program today, be sure you go to Tompkins-McCaw this afternoon or tomorrow. I want to thank the VCU departments that have put on this event. First, VCU Technology Services, the VCU Libraries, the VCU Health Systems, the School of Medicine, and the School of Nursing. Staff in those units have worked very hard to put together this program and to recruit the vendors that you'll see here today and tomorrow. And speaking of the vendors, I want to thank those vendors who are here in person and also helped out with their wallets a little bit to provide support for this cybersecurity fair. They're the ones that are sponsoring the refreshments and the prizes. Hopefully some of you can win those prizes. Please visit their booths upstairs and talk to them about their products and show them your support for supporting us in this fair. The sponsoring vendors include Accuvant, Encircle, Daily, Cisco, Dell, and Syrinx Technologies. I'm very pleased to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Dr. Gurprett Dhillon. Dr. Dhillon is a VCU person. He's a professor of information systems in the School of Business. Gurprett holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and Political Science. His research interests include the management of information security and the ethical and legal implications of information technology. Very apropos to the topic of this cybersecurity fair. He's very widely published in scholarly journals and has authored 7 books. That's 7 books. He's the guy to talk to about information security. He's also editor-in-chief of probably the premier journal, the Journal of Information Systems Security. And his comments are frequently published in the mainstream media, including the New York Times, NBC News, USA Today. So Gurprett is the perfect speaker to kick off our cybersecurity fair. And without further ado, please welcome Dr. Gurprett Dhillon.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dan. When Dan first asked me to do this presentation, I was really not sure as to where I could begin. I've been in the field of information security since the very early days, 1988, 89, 90, and I've been thinking about various aspects of security since. And really, it's a challenge to come in front of a group and kind of set the scene and say, you know what, this is what security is, and this is what possibly the problems are, and here are the solutions. Unfortunately, there are no solutions, right? There are more problems out there. But let me try and touch upon several issues in the world of information security as I see them. That's purely my perspective as far as security is concerned. A little bit of a background that Mark gave. I just want to add to a little bit over there. I have a really a global perspective on security, largely because of the kind of work that I have been involved in. My previous appointments have been at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Cranfield School of Management in UK. I worked in Hong Kong, and currently I hold 2 affiliate visiting positions, one in Portugal and one in Sweden. So that gets me around a little bit. And I've also worked in early part of my life with a company which has received not such good press of late, the Richard Van Poor Corporation, and Rupert Murdoch had to shut one of his newspapers in England. So I was working with Richard Van Poor and that group in 1987, 88. At a time when they were trying to increase their footprint around the world, and I was in their Hong Kong office trying to negotiate how we could beam signals to the world, really, through satellite. So one of my first assignments was to work with Asian and South Asian and some of the African countries to lease space on the transponders to beam signals so that we could capture the world, really. That's what we're doing. But then I got bored with the kind of routine stuff that we are doing, and I said, enough of it, I need to go and get a PhD, and rest is history. So that brings in a fair amount of international perspective and kind of things that I have been involved with. And hence, over the years, I've learned that I need to start my presentations with a conclusion, which really means that if you don't like anything, what you see in the conclusions, you can walk away. But there's an iPad 2 to be won, so you have to be here, I suppose. My conclusion is a fried egg, all right? In the last 15, 20 years of my work, I've kind of synthesized the world of information security into a fried egg. And I think of the yolk of an egg as really what I call technical security. Right? This is where computers are talking to each other. You have the networks. You have all sorts of issues related with networks. And something that obviously we cannot ignore, but clearly something which deserves, in organizations, more attention than others. And hence we end up having a kind of a skewed emphasis towards the technical control mechanisms because they're tangible, they're artifacts. You can work with them. You can put a lock and a key and you can see that you've done something. But for me, around the technical edifice is also what I call the albumin layer around my yolk, which is really where the formal controls are. That's where the rules are created, procedures are established, and those rules and procedures really dictate what happens in the world of technology. And there's something beyond that too, and that's what I call the informality of the security, and that's my white of an egg where obligations are established and responsibilities and norms are established and a culture is created and so on and so forth. Now it's very important to think about the systematic position of my fried egg, and if you go away and say, oh, that fried egg professor, I'll be the happiest person in the world because at least you'll remember me as a fried egg professor, if nothing else. The systematic position of this stuff is very, very important. And that is because, as is obvious, the yolk of an egg has to be contained. It has to be contained in the formalities of the organization, the rule structures that exist. And that rule structure really sits in how you do things, the culture, the norms, the obligations that you might have folks elsewhere in the organization. So that's my 2-minute conclusion, and now you're ready to go, if you can leave. That's what I'm going to be talking about as we go along. Given beyond that, in my mind, the truth of the matter is, irrespective of which organization you are, at home or at work or wherever you might be, the truth is that whichever network you create, it is not secure, right? Period. It is not secure. At best, it is a protected network, right? That doesn't do you too good, because protected networks are well-designed networks with rather savvy users. So that's the bottom line. In a perfect world, you will not have computer-based networks. You would not be connected to the internet. You would not have a home wireless network. You would probably not be using a smartphone. You'll probably not be subscribing to any kind of a data plan or geolocation services. You're probably relatively more protected than a lot of other people, right? But that's not the reality. We live in a world with rather savvy users. We live in a world where we create these networks. We live in a world where there is no security, really. Everybody can see where you are and what you are, all that stuff, There's clearly a false sense of security that we all seem to have, and typically what we say is, oh, I have a good security password, I know how to configure networks, and so I'm secure, right? The fact of the matter is that, that's all a false sense of security. So in my world, when an organization captures event logs and thinks that they're tracking what is happening in the world, and they think that they are secure, that's a false sense of security, because investigating and doing event logs doesn't mean a thing. If an organization thinks that they have a security policy and they think that they're secure, sadly so, they're not. If they think that they perform some kind of a vulnerability scan and so on and so forth, and they know what's happening, they're not. Penetration testing, which is a big thing right now in organizations, if they think that they're doing penetration testing and they think that they know where the vulnerabilities are, sadly, that doesn't mean that they're secure. And again, if you think that you can control the traffic to the internet and you think that you can be secure, you're sadly mistaken. I was asked just a few months ago by a magazine, Knowledge at Wharton, which is, they got about 200,000 subscribers. And when Hossein Mubarak pulled the plug out of Egypt's internet and, basically shut the internet for the country, what implications there were? Or were there any, right? Yet the revolution carried on, right, and rather successfully. We don't know what's going to happen, but that's what happened, right? And the same thing went with Libya and other countries. When countries think that by controlling this information they can protect the users and the citizens, they're sadly mistaken. The BlackBerry episode is a very interesting one, because we always used to think that our data communications through BlackBerry is very, very secure. Everything goes to Canada and secure servers, da-di-da-di-da. But around came Saudi Arabia, and they said, you know what? We're not going to let you operate in Saudi Arabia unless you have proxy servers in Saudi Arabia. UAE came around. They said, we're not going to let you operate in UAE. You have to have proxy servers there. China did the same thing. India did the same thing. So what did you end up doing? Obviously they had to survive. They ended up ceding to the needs of those countries. And then you have all sorts of other issues that emerge as a result. But does that keep the criminals out? The answer is no, because a perpetrator is obviously going to stick to the easiest and the quickest ways of gaining access to this information, and they're going to figure out a way of subverting those controls. And it's very easy. If a terrorist group has to communicate with someone else, are they going to use BlackBerry servers? Sure, no. Are they going to use a telephone? Definitely not. Definitely not. All you got to do is go into one of your Google or Yahoo emails, right? Write an email and save it as a draft. And someone is just logging in and taking all this information. You're not even communicating, right? It's a simple level. But there are other things that emerge as you go along. So there's all this false sense of security that we see, and organizations rely on antivirus softwares. They think that they are secure, and so on and so forth. Password controls, organization deploy some kind of a data security tool and think that they're secure. Organization hire an information security officer, but then they don't empower that officer to critique the IT decisions, right? Sounds very familiar, right? Now, is it going to help the organization? Certainly not. You need discourse if you need to improve, right? But human nature and organization nature is that we do not want to encourage those discourses, because suddenly the power and the politics of organizations comes into play. So these are some very interesting false sense of security issues that emerge as we go along. And in the world of security, you really are talking about a rather big fundamental trade-off. And that fundamental trade-off is between security, usability, and cost, cheap. And you typically get to pick any two, right? You can't have a very usable system. You can't have a secure system and at a very decent cost. You can't. That's a fact. And you got to pick just two, right? And how do you balance out your usability with security, your security with cost, your cost with usability? Is there a science to it? I haven't found any algorithm which lets me do this, honestly. And I work in this area. I don't know. People think that they know, but they don't. It's all gut feel. If you spend 10, 15 years doing this, then you have that gut feel that, this is probably what's going to work. I wish there was an algorithm which would tell me how much security I need to put in and still have a usable and a cost-effective system. Not going to happen. So there's a fundamental trade-off in the world of security as far as that is concerned. So the issue that we really need to be addressing as we go along is strategizing about security. Are we going to be proactive or reactive, or how are you going to be choosing between being proactive and reactive? The problem is, however, that in the world of security, we are rarely proactive. We always react to the problem, which means that once an event has occurred, once a vulnerability has been discovered or someone has subverted the controls and gained entry into a system, what do? We say, we know what happened, so now let's go and plug that hole. So we are literally plugging holes as we're going along, which really means the whole notion of security is an afterthought, right? So you have a shoe bomber or an underwear bomber or whatever. So what do? You start strip searching people. Is that a solution? No. Where is that fundamental issue that needs to be addressed? Right? Body scanners are not going to help you if you don't understand the issue. Now, having said that, I'm always very happy to be searched whenever I go through airport security, because at least I have that false sense of security in me that, it's okay. But that's a false sense of security I'm getting. Is it really a secure environment? The answer is no. The moment you leave home getting on an airport, you don't know if you're going to come back. And I do a lot of travel. You certainly don't know. So the question is being proactive or reactive, and that is a big issue for us. And when we talk about organizations, we look at our data, application hosts, internal networks, perimeters, physical securities, policies, procedures, and awareness that needs to go. I mean, it looks very neat. But what we typically see is all this is, when it comes to talking about security, nothing of this sort happens, and we kind of start patching, and I call it the new math syndrome, 1 + 1 = 0 - 1. So, nothing happens in net effect. We take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That's what's happening in the world of security. And now we can engage in this blame game as to why this is happening. But, and there's, again, no particular reason why such a thing happens. Call it human nature, call it organizational nature, call it our emotions, call it or incompetence, call it whatever. But that's exactly what we are doing. In every single organization, in every single institution, at a personal level, at an organizational level, and at a societal level, that's exactly what we are engaging in as we're going along. All right, so the easiest solution to overcome these things is to increase the level of security. And what is that level of security? Do we need this? Do we need to create these high walls? Is that what we want? Is this what security is? Right? So which really means that all I got to do is cross that perimeter and get in, and then it's anybody's game. Right? So security is really not an afterthought. It's really not being reactive. It's sitting down and considering some very fundamental things about the way the world functions, and then figuring out how I'm going to address those issues. And these begin with policies and procedures, to the visions, to the intents, and to working with people, and so on and so forth. And some of the things I will be talking about as we go along. The issue 2 that I have in the world of security is square pegs and round holes, right? And every single time, whatever problem we might have, we try and retrofit a solution into it, because I don't know what that hole looks like, but I do have something which I think can fit in, right? And I'm trying, because I have a bag full or a range of tools, so let me use those tools to address the problem without understanding what the problem might be. So we never end up engaging in any kinds of a needs assessment, right? This is extremely typical of organizations, because nobody understands what the problem is, but I have a solution, right? Because once you have a solution, people listen to you. Nobody is asking you to understand the problem in the first place. That's my biggest problem in the world of security as well. Issue 3 is understanding of social and behavioral aspects. Years ago, when I was in grad school, I read a book by this very famous author called Tom DeMarco. And he used to write about systems analysis and development and design, and how we should develop these good systems. And he ended up writing a wonderful novel later on, which is my all-time favorite, called The Deadline, right? Tom DeMarco. If you ever get a chance, it's a wonderful read. It's a novel about, it's a story about software development, but done very nicely. And Tom, in one of his books, I think it was published in the late 70s, wrote, he says, people do not matter. In the world of technology, people do not matter, right? And when I read that, it surprised me, because the school I went to, the London School of Economics, was just down the street from one of the very famous institutes, the Tavistock Institute. And Tavistock Institute had this wonderful lady, and she's no longer with us, by the name Enid Mumford. And Enid had spent years in the coal mines up north in England. And what she worked with the coal miners to optimize coal production. And what she discovered in her research was the best of the technologies do not increase the production of coal. It's the coal miners who increase the production of coal. It's working with them. It's their conditions. It's their interactions with the technology which increase the production of coal. And that finding, simple, commonsensical, we all know that from the GM days and the Ford days. But the simple assertion that Enid was making, and then translating that assertion into the world of information technology, rings a bell, right? It says, hang on, if we are focusing and spending all our money on technology and technology-related solutions, and yet we have simply ignored the behavior and the social interactions of people, something is wrong, right? And this is what Tavistock Institute did in the 50s and the 60s, right? And we've forgotten that, right? So social and behavioral aspects are are absolutely critical. And the enemy within in the world of, and you must have seen different statistics, you pick up any newspaper from the Wall Street Journals to the CIO magazine to anything, you would see this. And time and again, and I have, in at least 15 to 20 years of my career, I haven't seen that figure change. They always say 60 to 80% of computer crime security problems occur because of the enemy within. That figure has not changed. It's very easy for the enemy within to do whatever they want, right? Because they have the right kind of the tools, right kind of an access, right kind of a motivation. There are three reasons, I always say, there are three reasons why people commit crimes: opportunity, work situation, personal factors. They're unhappy at work. There's an opportunity. They've just undergone a divorce or broken up or had a fight with their wife. So says, okay, I'm just angry. I want to do something. Whatever be the reasons, those are really translating into the world of security, and we do not necessarily focus on those things. The enemy within is a big problem for us. And our solution to the enemy within problem is, well, let's hide our data. Let's not make it public, right? Now, by renaming administrative passwords accounts, keeping the bad guys from the admin accounts, or turning off your SSID broadcast, or ensuring that nobody finds your AP, or do not display the last logged on user, and so on and so forth, or never volunteer a username, and so on and so forth. Is that going to help? The answer is no, it's not going to help. Hiding does not help because they will find you. They will find you, and security by obscurity is a weak defense at best, right? So again, it goes back to the enemy within and the stuff that we really need to be focusing upon. Right. My fourth issue in the world of security is what I call the CIA problem. CIA here for me is the confidentiality of data, the integrity of data, and the availability of data. And unfortunately, what we have seen over the years is an over-reliance of individuals. It's in our mindsets of organizations to have that false sense of comfort of sorts, that if I'm able to keep the data confidential, if I'm able to ensure that the data does not change, maintain the integrity, or if I'm able to ensure that it's available to the right people at the right time, I probably got it, right? One aspect that folks, of course, forget over a period of time is that CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, was invented way back in the 70s in the DoD. Right? And it worked very, very well in that environment, largely because you're talking about hierarchical organizations where people have different levels of access and control, and you have a lot of respect for that organizational hierarchy. Unfortunately, those hierarchies don't exist today. Right? The organizations have been transformed dramatically. They are more virtual and they're more organismic in nature, as I call them. Right? They're spread all over the world with very, very weak internal relationships, very strong external relationships, and so that becomes a big problem for us. What did I do? Probably went back, I think. Okay. Let's go back to our issue 2. So the appropriate use of CIA is what we really need to be looking at. And because our reliance on CIA has been so great, what we end up looking at is account lockouts, because if some kind of a problem exists, we say, let's lock out the account. But account lockout is attack detection, is it? but detection does not always work, right? Detections do go bad, right? So probably, and I have been locked out of many of my accounts many a times at the institution where I work to no avail, right? And then we, of course, have this big password problem, right? The single sign-on has failed, right? It has failed because you have numerous of them. And here is a password problem gone wrong, right? And in spite of the fact that we created all these password policies, right, there is no way you can do without writing them somewhere. There's no way. You have to. Because there's so many, and all of them expiring at different times in different institutions, you just don't have a solution. Right? It's a very ripe research issue for us. My fifth issue in this whole scheme of things is what I call responsibility and clarity of business processes, integrity of roles, trust, and ethicality. And I say this because early on, and I'll share with you what my current thinking is. About 5 to 7 years ago, I would come in and say that confidentiality, integrity, and availability does not work of data alone. You need to do something else. CIA will work if you think in terms of who is responsible for the data, right? And some organizations have invented roles such as data stewards and so on and so forth. The people occupying those roles, are they integral? Are they good people? Have they been vetted? Because there's so many problems with bad apples in organizations that you have all these issues. The most recent one is Kwaku from UBS, who subverted those controls, and there are numerous such examples from Barings Banks and Joseph Jets to Kidder Peabody's and so on and so forth. There's so many such examples where bad apples have gone and subverted those controls and really brought those organizations to their knees. But we really focus on this whole notion of integrity of roles and integrity of people. Trust. Do you have trust with the people you work with? And then finally, ethicality. How ethical are people? How ethical are those given work environments? So about 5 years ago, I would come around and say that these are very, very important. But I kind of have revised some of the thinking. And I think that a problem is that is the people. The real problem is uneducated users, I think, right? And properly configured users in my world are your strongest defense. So the question that arises at this juncture is, what can you do? What can you do? What can people in organizations do? And I have a bullet list of, maybe 6 principles, 6 things that need to be thought about. Establish good security leadership and new technology competence. That's a big one, because the problem is you need a vision, you need a strategy, and you need an ability to understand those new technologies that emerge. The problem is that every time around, even if you're a technology enthusiast and you're in the world of technology, every time around something new comes, you're totally lost, right? So in the world of security, if you really need to protect your systems, you really need to understand what that new technology is and have an ability to take informed decisions about it. Review your infrastructure security. That's a big one for institutions. Understand the new paradigm of data security and storage. I know there's a session later on today on cloud computing and cloud security. It's a big one. It's where is your data? Years ago you could really say, my data resides in the center, in computer center somewhere, and I have a vault and it's protected. And if something goes wrong, I know who the person responsible for it is. Today, your data may be, I don't know, it could be in Iceland for all you know, where actually a lot of data resides because of the cold climates. Or it might be in rack space in San Antonio. And all they did was, well, not all, more than that. They bought an old mall and converted that into a data center, right? And it could be anywhere for that matter, right? It's certainly not in your organization, right? That I'm pretty sure, right? So what is this new paradigm for data storage and security? We need to understand that. That's a reality waiting for us to be addressed. Consider your identity and access management. And in my world, I think identity management is going to be the big deal. In 10 years from now, I see myself standing in this or a similar such room and giving a lecture not on security management, but a talk on identity management. Because our identities are going to be so mobile and evolving as we go along, because they're going to be changing as you go along, because of the nature of the computing world, that the whole nature of the security field is going to evolve into what I call identity management, right? From an institution protecting your identity, it will be you responsible for your identity alone. How do you carry your identity and how do you ensure its protection and safety is going to be up to you, right? So it's going to be, and that renews our emphasis on technology leadership, renews our emphasis on educated users, educated individuals, renews our emphasis on technology competence. All those things will gain prominence as we go along in this new era, right? And I also think that investments in privacy-preserving technology and policies is going to be a big deal as we go along. And developing new guidelines for audit and compliance. What we do in terms of audit and compliance is outdated, is almost 15 years old, and we still use it. So that's something which needs to be thought about carefully. So in terms of leadership and technology, here's my thought on what is out and what is in. Out is your fear, uncertainty, and doubt. In is your metrics and return on your security investments. Out is your blame game and fall guys. Risk management and shared responsibility is in. Out is your tech talk and cop speak, and in is your business language and communication skills. Out is your silos, and in is your holistic security. Right? That's my take on the world of leadership and technology. And leadership is very, very important, and you need to follow the leader, right? Right? A security expert is someone who is quoted in the press, really, and is certified or certifiable. Is that what you really, really want in terms of a leader? I think not. I think leadership is an art. There's a science to it, but it's an art, right? Infrastructure security. My old order is limited user authentication and authorization. The new order out there is secure authentication and authorization in multiple tenants. And cloud computing is here to stay. Identity management will play an increasingly important role, as I said. So in my world, the new paradigm for me, this is a bit of, I wanted to get everything here in this one slide, so apologies for the smaller font. But the new paradigm, at least according to me, is the following. In the 1970s, our focus was really on confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data and information. We focused on that. In the 1980s, we went a step ahead. With networking and all that stuff, we wanted to authenticate, and we wanted to make sure of non-repudiation aspects, that those were taken care of. But as we went along in the 1990s, CIA and authentication and non-repudiation was not enough. We wanted correctness and specifications, because a lot of errors came around into the systems that we are building because they were not correctly specified to begin with. So there were flaws, and hence you ended up having errors and security problems. So a lot of focus was on correctness of specification. And this is where a lot of this past work from the Carnegie Mellon Institute came into being. In the 2000s, we are not only talking about CIA, authentication, non-repudiation, and correctness of specification. We are talking about a more individual focus. The shift has focused from someone taking care of your data and information to you, of responsibility. Who is responsible? Integrity of the roles, trustworthiness, and ethicality. That became very, very important. In the 2010s and beyond, as I look beyond for the next 10 years, I think it is beyond the CIA, the non-repudiation, authentication, correctness of specification, and the right. An additional thing needs to be considered, and that is identity management. It's your identity. That's a big deal. The way the world is evolving, identity protection is going to be a big one. My 2 cents on auditing. Every time we talk about security and auditing, we always talk about auditing everything. we need to know exactly what's going on. That's the mantra of the auditors. We need to know what's happening in the organization. We need to know what's happening in the security systems. Will you be able to tell really in that mess? Will you? I don't think so. And all you end up saying, oh, that's a tasty one. It's a second guess at best. Right? And every single time you have found a security problem or a problem in governance structures or whatnot, it was an auditor's fault because they just couldn't do it. Because every time around you have an auditing exercise, who goes and does the auditing? It's the junior most member of the auditing team who's sent on the task. Right? Someone who has the least experience is the one who's doing the grunt work. Right? There's an art to it. We've forgotten the art aspect to the science. You have to balance that. You have to have that gut feeling. When you look at certain things, you can tell. When I read student papers, by flipping through the pages, I can, to a large extent, tell how well it's been done. Right? I form my first impression by looking at the first two lines and the last two lines and, a few stuff in between. That's my first impression. And then I go into the detail. And that's largely because I've been doing it for years. Right? By looking at it, I can just simply tell. The same thing goes with a lot of senior auditors, but just looking at a few things, they can tell, they can smell certain things that are fishy. But we don't do that. We send the junior most person to do the audits. So what's happening in the world of auditing and compliance? Oops. Out are the checklists, and in are your risk assessments and mitigations. Out are your annual operational audits. In are at least your quarterly operational audits. Out are your employee vetting and hiring. In is your periodic employee assessment. And I proudly say this many times. In my career, I have just been vetted in one institution. And in that institution, I've been vetted twice. And that is VCU. And I've worked all over the world. VCU, when I was hired, they wanted to make sure I had the terminal degree. And when I got promoted to a full professor, they wanted to make sure I had a degree. I found that to be a little funny. But, you already hired me, you already vetted me, so you're doing another. But there are institutions who do not vet you at all. Right? You just go and say whatever you say, and that is it. Right? And that is it. Right? Joseph Jett, who brought down Kidder Peabody by subverting those internal technical controls in a system which is a GE merchant bank, claimed himself to be a Harvard graduate. They just hired him because he was from the minorities and a Harvard graduate. What else can you ask for? Nobody bothered to pick the phone up or look at his credentials. No one. Right? So periodic employee assessment is very important. Out is your business process engineering, and in is your security culture. Right? So we need to spend more time on that aspect. So the good news in this whole scheme of things is that there is an increased level of awareness. People are talking about it. Forums like these are a good step in the right direction. There is an increased level of awareness regarding information security. Security awareness typically figures fairly high on corporate agendas nowadays, and businesses are trying to be proactively engaged in getting the word out to their employees. That's the good news. The bad news, however, is that being aware is not equal to being secure. There's a problem with the nature and scope of your security awareness training. Information security is rather complex, and people do not necessarily look into that. And this is obvious for us, for all of us. In spite of the fact that we are all aware, and in spite of the fact that we do engage in some kind of a training, how many times have you been tempted to open an email with the following subject line? Return mail. See transcript for details. You just send that very important email to your boss. And you get this in return and say, you know what, it probably didn't make it through. Let me open it up. Many people do. How many of you, honestly? Yeah, a few of us have, yeah. And here's from 2010. Here are the top subjects of your subject lines, right? And these are spammers, and people do click on them. You know, your wife's photos, blank subject line, your order with Amazon, da-di-da-di-da, right, all that stuff. Right. So with that, I'm open for questions. All I will say is be safe as you go along in the world of security. Right? I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.